Esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen, all 777 of you, fantastic, welcome. Good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to this approximately 90-minute event, Destination 2050, a route to net zero European aviation, organised and hosted by Europe's aviation sector, namely the European Regions Airline Association, ERA, Airlines for Europe, A4E, the Airports Council International, ACI Europe, the Aerospace and Defence Industries Association of Europe, ASD, and the Civil Air Navigation Services Organisation, CANSO, which is the voice of the air traffic management industry. My name is Katrina Sickle. I'm a moderator and broadcaster, and I have the pleasure of navigating us all from my home office in Brussels through this event in 4 parts. An event that features a raft of excellent speakers drawn from the stakeholder ecosystem. We've got airport and airline specialists, policymakers, and also the voice of civil society. Now, our event, of course, marks the very recent launch of the flagship's sustainability initiative, of the sector's flagship sustainability initiative, which is driven by a roadmap. And the roadmap articulates the sector's vision on how to realise net zero CO2 emissions for European aviation by 2050. And it offers commitments for industry and recommendations for policymakers on supporting the pathway forwards, not just to achieve meaningful CO2 emissions reduction efforts in Europe, but of course, we all know, globally. Now, our discussions today will explore the 4 focus areas in that roadmap to make aviation sustainable. I'm not going to say any more about that at this stage because I am actually going to leave that to our first speaker to distill and deliver the main elements of that report. In fact, all of our speakers today are going to share their expertise, their ideas and their experience across the event, but you are going to get to voice yours too during the panel debate that takes place in the 3rd part of our event. Now, more on that particular debate and how you can pose your questions in a moment, because I don't want to delay things any further. I'm going to ask in just a moment the gentleman who's going to frame our discussions today to join me. His name is Michiel van Dorst. He is CEO of the Executive Board of Air Traffic Control in the Netherlands, LVNL, and prior to it, he spent more than 20 years at KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. He is also Vice Chairman of the Europe CANSO CEO Committee EC3. And as I said before, CANSO, which is the Civil Air Navigation Services Organisation, is the voice of the air traffic management industry. So after all that preamble, voila, there you are. That prevents you, Michiel, having to sit there and smile as I make my way through just a tiny bit of your bio. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you. I think the fact that the sector as a whole, you will agree, and I think that's important for you also to reinforce, no less than 5 associations has come together for the first time to develop and deliver this roadmap that outlines this path towards the net zero objective. So that in itself is unique. So what I'm going to ask you to do, please, is to highlight, unpack it a bit, highlight the whys and the hows and the whats, and tell us a little bit more so we can understand the context of today's discussions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Katrina, for your introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. And I fully agree with what you have said. The fact that we have come together as 5 entities to come up with this flagship report, Destination 2050, a route to net zero European aviation, that is, I think, a highlight in itself. And I'm really honored to welcome you all to this high-level policy event following the successful launch of this so-called flagship report. The report lays out a pathway for European aviation to reduce its net CO2 emissions by 55% by 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by 2050, all in line with the European Green Deal. As we all know, the COVID crisis has severely impacted the aviation sector globally. Eurocontrol's latest figures show that air traffic in Europe has declined by a stunning figure of 67% compared to 2019 levels. And similarly, traffic at European airports has shrunk to 1995 levels. And this is without doubt the worst crisis in modern history of aviation. At the same time, however, it is our chance to come together as a sector and provide a vision for the industry to become greener, more digital, and more resilient to future shocks like we are experiencing at the moment with COVID. Now, the Destination 2050 is not simply a vision or a wish list. It is based on an independent scientific report that is researched and written by two independent consultancy firms, the Netherlands Aerospace Center and CO Economic Research. And based on this, our 5 associations have laid out a set of commitments and actions for our industry and recommended policy options for policymakers as well. Because only together we can make Europe a leading example and inspiration for sustainable aviation globally. We want to provide a path for meaningful contribution to CO2 emission reduction. And the European Commission, with its flagship Green Deal, has set out a clear vision for the future of our economy. And Destination 2050 is the response of our industry to the Green Deal, showing how aviation can significantly contribute to Europe's climate goals. How? Through a combination of measures around 4 pillars. The first, improved air traffic management and aircraft operations. Second, investment in new engine and aircraft technologies. Third, sustainable aviation fuels. And fourth, economic measures such as carbon pricing like EU ETS and carbon offsetting mechanisms like, for instance, CORSIA. As a representative of CANSO, I would like to draw attention to how more digital network-centric ATM can contribute not only to smooth travel experience for passengers, but also reduce CO2 emissions. Improvement in ATM and aircraft operations can make a systemic contribution of 6% to CO2 emission reduction, thanks to the improvement in airline operations, ATM, and ground operations at airports. Policy-wise, the full implementation of the Single European Sky initiative, currently under negotiation, is the single most important file to make this a reality, together with the research and innovation carried out through the CESAR joint undertaking. What we need is a more network-centric approach to air traffic management. In order for Europe to dive into the future and achieve its ambitious climate goals in aviation, we need policies that enable a stable long-term legal framework so that the industry can invest in new technologies, such as, for instance, sustainable aviation fuels, hydrogen-powered and electrical aircraft. And this is exactly why today's discussion is so important and relevant. Aviation is and will remain one of Europe's key sectors because it has a powerful interdependency with other sectors. It provides connectivity for Europe, and it supports 10 million jobs across the EU alone. Hence, today, policymakers, industry leaders, civil society representatives are here to discuss how we can deliver the sustainable potential of aviation while maintaining the socio-economic benefits it provides from increased connectivity. And we, as 5 partners, believe that the route laid out in Destination 2050 report is possible and achievable. So please join us on this journey so that together we can embark on a path to net zero European aviation. Thank you, Katrien.
Thank you very much. My goodness, do you know, first of all, just from a moderating point of view, you said to me, Kat, I think I'll be speaking 5 minutes. And you have done that. I think you must be the first to stick to what you said. While I have you here, just a quick question, if I may. As a
former pilot, as a former pilot, I was, we were all always planning to arrive on time.
Okay, arrive on time and don't say too much from the cockpit, right?
True.
Okay. Thank you for that. You talked there about the 4 pillars, and we looked at the aircraft and the engine technology, the improvements that need to come. You focused very particularly there on the air traffic management operations, We had a little bit about sustainable aviation fuel there, and of course, economic measures. We haven't sort of talked explicitly, I know it's going to come up, but the EU ETS. Now, in this roadmap, what I find very interesting is you're sort of saying we need to look at how the interplay between all these things. Some can be a bridge. Some they can move fast in the short term, but actually in the long term, they need X, Y, Z from policymakers, or they need investments to scale up or to cross-pollinate. So if you had to say to me the thing I'm most excited about in this roadmap, let's say we're having a drink in a brasserie, what would it be?
It's probably, I tend to look from the ATM perspective, right? And I think what is very interesting is the fact that I've seen something happening in the last few months during this COVID crisis that was from an initial response to the COVID crisis. ANSPs have to cut back on cost, to a understanding, I would say, from the different countries, but at the end also from the European Commission, that the ANSP world is not only costing you money, but it also has it's an infrastructure provider. And if we keep investing during these very difficult times, and of course we have to cut back on cost, I understand that, but if we keep investing, we can create future value, because normally in ATM it's about long-term investment horizons. And the fact that the European Commission gave the possibility to states to identify what the investment programs of an ANSP could be, also during this period, it really helped us as LVNL to keep up our investment portfolio in, I would say, actions against noise, to make sure that noise abatement comes to play in the next few years, but also on emission reductions. Just to mention too, at Schiphol Airport, we are planning to introduce RECAD TBS at the end of this year, which will mean that we will make less use of the most noise-sensitive runways at this airport. And at the same time, we're also continuing on the airspace redesign project on the Netherlands, which will lead to a significant reduction in emission. So the fact that the mindset has shifted a little bit from cost reduction to value creation on the longer run, especially on the Green Deal, that is a very important mindset.
Okay. One last question, because I know that all of our lovely panelists who are in the third part, we've got a bit of a great interlude before that, when we hear from the European institutions, are going to go into this roadmap and unpack some of those recommendations and commitments in more depth. But the obvious thing to say is the following: COVID has been, the European Green Deal, but COVID also has been a good way to bring you all together in this unique way. Do you feel hopeful, genuinely, that can the consumer trust, can those who work in the industry trust that you can maintain this spirit and collaboration as we slowly move beyond the pandemic?
Well, history has shown that it's not always easy. I must admit that, but at the same time, I think everybody I speak to in this sector, in the aviation sector, and all over Europe, I would say, probably even all over the world, is really in a deep understanding of the fact that we have to act on this big climate change thing. And I think that's what binds us together. And I really hope, and I look forward to working with all our partners, also today on the conversation, to work on all our partners to make the best out of it. Not to save our own generation, but to make sure that the next generations can live on a healthy planet as well. So I'm sure that this overarching ambition will help us to lead the way in the next few years.
Thank you very much, and thank you. And I will take advantage of your brevity to be able to crack on at exactly the right time and move into part 2 of our event. So you get to take a nice breather off stage and to follow from the comfort of wherever you are the rest of our event. So thank you very much to Michiel there for framing this. And as I said, we are going to unpack the roadmap, the report in more detail when we get to our panel debate, but also in this next part. Now, I described this as an event in 4 parts. At any point, you can express your viewpoints, ladies and gentlemen, on Twitter. It's #Destination2050. And of course, all of the hosting and organizing associations, there we go. They also have their own Twitter accounts. So feel free to make your voice heard. What's happening now in this second part? Well, I am going to hand over the baton to another moderator, and that moderator is Jan Palmer. He is CEO of XFly and president of ERA, one of the associations behind this great initiative, the European Regions Airline Association, that represents the interests of aviation in Europe. And this gentleman, who's going to come to screen in just a second, has a very long and interesting history in the aviation sector, because he was president of the Skyways group, vice president of the Selenia group, which is the mother company of Skyways, and the regional cargo airline Amapola Flüge. I hope that pronunciation was good. He'll tell me when he comes on screen. And also he was chairman of the Swedish Aviation Association. So let's meet him now. Hello, how did I do? How was the pronunciation?
Oh, you're learning slowly.
Oh, I'm not sure whether that was insulting or that was kind of the style of the typical English understatement there. I was quite happy. You're learning slowly. Thank you. I am going to introduce your two speakers before I disappear. So what's great is you're going to moderate this lovely interlude here. Can I ask to join me now from the European Commission? It's great to have Deputy Director General of DG Climate Action, Clara de la Torre. So welcome to Clara de la Torre. And from the European Parliament, we've got Chair of the ENVI Committee, MEP Renew Europe Group, Pascal Canfin. So welcome to all of you. Hello, thank you for being with us. Now that you are here, I'm going to disappear and leave this part in the capable hands of Jan, and I'll pop back in about 25 minutes to say goodbye to you. I know, Clara, you need to leave a little bit before that and take our audience into part 3 of the event, which is the panel debate. But before that, the floor is yours, Jan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. First of all, on behalf of ERA, our partner associations, and the entire European aviation industry, behind our initiative, the Destination 2050, I would like to thank both Clara and Pascal to join us today. We know that Clara has a pretty tight schedule, so I would just like to put the floor to Clara and share with us your keynote address, please.
Thank you very much, Jan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament. I'm very glad to be here in this in presentation of this Destination 2050 report and commitment, which is even more important in a particularly timely moment where the whole economy is suffering a lot, where this sector is suffering a lot as well. But we are at the same time, we have ahead of us the prospects for recovery, and therefore the aviation sector has, and in that recovery, the aviation sector has an important role, a protagonist role to play. You know, what we have been hearing and reading in this Destination 2050 is somewhat music to our ears, in the sense that, as you know, with the European Green Deal, we are raising continuously the climate ambition of the Union, and we know that if we want to manage to get to the climate neutrality 2050, we need to have the transport sector contributing to 90% of reduction of the emissions. So congratulations to the stakeholders that have been preparing this report, and to the commitments that are being taken. I note well that in this Destination 2050, we were talking about the flights within and departing the European Union, and this will be leading us to a reduction of 30 million tons of CO2s. And I also realized that the CO2 impacts are not yet dealt with. You know that we have published in the European Commission, and we have very much been animated by the European Parliament to publish a report on the consequences of the non-CO2 impacts, which have a significant nature, and we'll have to be working on that together, hopefully. We are very glad also to see that the clear structure of your commitments around technology, where, you know, in the European Union we are pushing for more investment in the framework program for Horizon for in Horizon Europe framework program for research and innovation, where there we have a couple of partnerships with industry, one on the clean aircrafts and the other one on the traffic management. So we are preparing, as you know, linking with your second pillar, the fuels initiative for aviation for a quicker and better uptake of sustainable fuels, economic instruments as well, and not least all the operational measures that you are referring to. All this is being as well crafted in what we call the Fit for 55 package. As you know, we are revising the existing legislation in the field of climate, energy, and others, precisely to make the European Union fit for the commitments of climate neutrality in 2050. One of the main pillars of that legislation, as far as we are concerned in climate, is the ETS, the European the emission trading system, which is a cornerstone of our policy. We are revising that. In these days, we are busy as we speak with the preparation of the impact assessment, looking at different scenarios of how we should better reinforce ETS. And one of the aspects that is being dealt with and will appear in our proposal is how do we articulate in the best possible manner ETS and CORSIA, which has been referred to a couple of minutes ago. CORSIA being an important driver for addressing the global emissions, and in which the European Union would like to see increased ambition. We are also looking at the increase of the auctioning part of the allowances as a means to render the system even more cost effective. So please take us as a partner that we are in all the different aspects of your undertakings. And we are more than happy to continue discussing and going into the details, looking at how do you plan to render these commitments accountable? How are you going to monitor them so that we can all together make sure that we are having a solid system, a solid aviation sector that will contribute fairly to our climate transition. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Clara. And it was interesting, and also we are very happy you are positive to our initiative. And I really appreciate what you said, something about working together, which I think is absolutely necessary if we are going to reach the goals. I have a little question to you. I will still have a little bit of time, and it's a little bit about there is some kind of program where you are trying to move passengers from aviation to trains, and they have used 500 kilometers as some kind of distance. And I've been 40 years in this business, and most of the time as a CEO of a regional airline, and I have the discussions we have with the regions out in Europe is that, for example, between Tallinn and Stockholm is 350 kilometers, but it's just water. So it will take some time to put the railway there. But so there are very different circumstances for different regions in Europe. And how will you, I do understand that we should work together with trains where it's possible and so on. What is your opinion on this?
Thank you. Your question shows the complexity of the issue that we are all together trying to address. So what we're doing in the Commission is trying to make sure that we are putting there the enabling conditions for transport operators to offer travelers by 2030 climate neutral choices, so that they can in particular for the the trajectories of less than 500 kilometers. And what you're saying, not all places in Europe are the same. We always say that diversity is the strength of Europe, and it has sometimes a cost, but it's a strength of Europe. And therefore, what we are doing is looking at the mobility system as a whole. Of course, the protagonism is there by the transport modes, but we are addressing in this mobility ecosystem, the dimensions of smartness, which are already existing, fortunately, but we are trying to reinforce them, and the dimension of sustainability. So modal shifts will have to occur where they are possible, and they are efficient in the broad sense, taking into consideration economic and climate perspective. So we are also trying to make sure that the infrastructure we have are being used in a more efficient way, that we have better performing tools also for the passengers to take more conscious choices of their mobility patterns. So these are all the ingredients of mobility, and there, whether it's in the behaviors, in the transport modes or in infrastructure, the technological and non-technological innovation is of the essence. So if we had the reply on there, it would be, I'm sure we would have found a solution together.
Yeah, it's a complex world. I totally agree with you on that. But most of the time, in Sweden, they have used connectivity time instead of distances to have as a rule. And I do understand you're already thinking about this. My last question, because you have to leave. I think many are interested exactly what's going to happen to the aviation and the airlines concerning this ETS program, or what you are doing right now. Can you give us a little bit more hint of how will it impact the airlines in the relatively short term?
We are, as I was saying, as we speak, we are finalizing our impact assessment. And in the impact assessment, what we're doing is having a number of different options, different scenarios, how we should proceed. The most important, determinant part of the choice would be, of course, how we entangle ETS with CORSIA. So one thing is we can make sure, we are sure, because it's said in the directive, that CORSIA will be implemented via ETS, that the European Union is committed with CORSIA, and that the European Union is also committed to make CORSIA more ambitious and effective. The next triennial ICAO assembly will take place in 2022, if I'm correct. And there it's an important moment where we have to be all mindful of where are we going to, because there will be a moment where we'll be revising the mechanism of CORSIA. And therefore, one of the things we have to be also mindful is whatever amendments we do in ETS, the entangling with CORSIA, we cannot afford backsliding, and we have to go on with the European Union being showing the way, if you allow me, for decarbonization and in the use of efficient systems of carbon pricing. So I'm sure that what the Commission will be proposing will be totally in coherence with the decarbonization pathway and with a strong recovery of the European economy, with both at the same time.
Super. Very good. Thank you so much, Clara. And because I think you need to move on, and we do understand that. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you very much, and apologies for that. Thank you.
So I do have Pascal as our next speaker. So and we are going to, I know Katrina wants us to keep time, so we will start immediately with Pascal. Give us your presentation, please.
Okay, so thank you for your invitation. I will make a few remarks regarding your roadmap presented a couple of days ago. First, as the ENVI committee chair, I very much welcome that kind of tool because we need sectorial roadmaps in order to move from the okay, we need to go to carbon neutrality on how are we going to get there. And you start answering the how, which is of course the key issues now we have on our joint table. That's precisely, and we like so much that kind of tool, the sectorial roadmaps for net zero, that we want, when I say we, is the European Parliament as a whole, we want to have it as a mandatory tool in the climate law. And we need to make sure that all the sectors, at least the most concerned sector by climate impact, do deliver on that kind of sectorial roadmaps. And we would like to have these sectorial roadmaps not only, I would say, industry driven, but as a common good between the public authorities on one side and the private sector on the other side. Precisely to do what you said, Jan, meaning that we need to work together. Okay, we need to work together, but then we need to agree on where we want to get and how we are going to support your needs and what kind of commitments you can take in exchange. And we are, that's my profound feeling, we are just at the beginning of it. Because you make the first step, and it's a good first step, but it's a first step. Now we need, for instance, to know, as policymakers, what are your investment needs associated to the various pathway you want to embark upon. And the investment needs regarding the technologies, for instance, like hydrogen. We need also to know more about the way you and we put your sectorial roadmap into a more larger, I would say, picture. If I take another example, which is another key lever you want to raise, which is the sustainable fuel. It's about something that will be grown in our fields. If I take the sustainable fuel that will come from the agriculture or from the waste management. And of course, we need to make sure that it makes sense. When you put that into the global picture of the common agricultural policy, in the global picture of the food security picture, and so on and so on. Precisely in order to avoid actually the trap we collectively fall in, with, let's say, a decade ago, when we encourage a lot the car makers to go for agrocarbs, and at the end of the day, they completely switched because it wasn't sustainable. So I acknowledge, and rightly so, that you made the point for not using first generation sustainable fuel coming from agrocarbons, but of course we need to put that into the global picture, because if you want to use sustainable alternative fuels as a main driver for decarbonization, we need to make sure that this driver is sustainable as well. And you can't do that alone. You can't. So that's why we want to use the climate law to precisely create this tool to have a structured dialogue between public authorities and private sector to make sure that we have the joint roadmap. And as policymakers, then we take our responsibility to give you the needs, for instance, through the European Investment Bank or whatever, through the budget, European budget and so on, to make sure that we have the right delivery model for you and you have the right commitments when it comes to climate neutrality. And we are not there yet. Maybe that my last comment, and I guess you will have questions as well on CORSIA and so on, that we need to make sure that you think as well as your companies, your industry, as a mobility provider. I mean, the way we managed to have a deal with the car industry is precisely to say, okay, we are going to speed up the technological shift through EVs, and we are going to put the right incentives in place. There are a lot of money coming from the recovery plans that will be used to boost the EVs market share. And at the same time, we put the right standards in place to make it at scale. And at the same time, we discuss with the car makers on their strategy to move from purely being car manufacturer to be mobility service provider. Of course, they will keep on producing goods, greener goods, but they will also provide services for mobility, which was not at the core of their business, let's say 10 years ago, but that will grow as a market share and as a new business for them. So, and this dimension is, unless I'm wrong, not in your roadmap. And I think it's a pity, because of course it's part of to my view, it's part of the new business model for you in a decarbonized world. So again, very good first step. We need this. We need a bit more clarity on your investment needs, on the material impact of the consequences of the technologies you are relying on. And we want to go deeper into the dialogue with you so that we can, at the end of the day, get what we want to get, meaning the climate neutral world.
Thanks a lot, Pascal, and I do appreciate that we agree that we have to do this together somehow. We have to find a way. One of the issues is that when airlines invest in aircraft, there may be aircraft with new technology which is not there yet. There is a lifetime of 20 years or more for such an aircraft. So what is your time schedule on this? Because we need to know pretty fast what kind of support we can get from the European Parliament and from also of course from national countries and so on. So it is otherwise it becomes a little bit foggy for many airlines to
exactly. So that's, what you are saying is exactly the point I was highlighting. We need to have this agreement on, okay, you plan to invest on the next investment cycle X billions for hydrogen planes.
Yeah.
But then you're going to have a lot of planes that we would like to phase out of the market progressively. What kind of support do you need for that? Yeah. I don't know where this discussion is happening. And my gut feeling is that it's not happening anywhere. Precisely because we do not have this space for the structural dialogue for you to know what we could put and what we should put on the table, and for us to know what you could put on the table. That's why, by the way, I very much welcome the fact that the European Roundtable, the more than 50 CEOs organization, I would say, including Shell or Total or Nestle and so on, are strongly supportive of this idea coming from the Parliament to have mandatory net zero sectoral pathway and roadmaps co-designed, I would say, both by public authorities and private authorities, so that I could answer your completely legitimate question. For instance, we could have phasing out these schemes for the older planes. We do not at that stage. Okay, we do not have it precisely because we don't have a deal. So that's why the main risk for you is that we only work on the stick thing, and we do not build the carrot thing. So if we want to have the carrot and the stick at the same time, which is at the end of the day the only possibility we have, or the two of us, is we need to have this deal. You provide us a good first basis, but then let's work together for the next step.
Super. I think I do thank you very much, Pascal. It has been very interesting to listen to you, and I think we hand over to Katrina again.
Thank you. With Excellent Swedish efficiency there. Thank you so much, Pascal. I think that was very interesting. If anybody is tweeting, then I like that, you know, that balance between the carrot and stick. What was interesting for me, Jan, was just hearing, you know, where is that joint discussion happening? That was particularly interesting. And you both seem to need to know on both sides, yes, we'll work together, but quite that mechanism of getting the timing right to work together for the best fit, so you don't waste time and energy, and funding is very particular. I also picked up there the emphasis on R&D and the commitment there from the EU side of things. I know we're going to look again at the ETS. What I did also pick up from Clara was her comment, you know, what interests me, she said, is how you as a sector are going to monitor all of this and be accountable for what you have put on the table there as your commitments. And of course, I heard there from Pascal about sustainable fuels. We all know this discussion, and doubtless it's going to come up now in the panel debate. What was the main one thing that you took away, Jan, from that little interlude with?
I do hope that this kind of cooperation thing and how to fund this extreme development we will have to go through, that it's really something substance behind it, and that they are acting swiftly, because in aviation there are so long-term decisions. Yeah. So we cannot, and they cannot be changed. You know, this is the problem. Huh? If you do an investment of an aircraft, it's a very long, capital-intensive thing. So we cannot just change the system somewhere. It has to be some kind of order in this. Otherwise, we won't be able to do it.
But it's very clear. It's like there needs to be this other phase, isn't there? There is this welcome of the report. There is there's some brilliant, more than top lines there, but we need to unpack it more to get so that we can be as coherent and efficient together.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Jan, for coming to the screen and handling that part. And now you can have a seat backstage and enjoy the rest of this event. So that's brilliant. I'm just going to, ladies and gentlemen, alter my own view actually on my screen, because it helps me understand who I've got with me when. So as I said, this is an event in 4 parts, and we're moving into the third part, which is the panel discussion, where we are going to explore in a little bit more detail, also taking into account what we've heard there from the EU institutions and from Jan, the vision, the pathway, the recommendations articulated in the roadmap. And just to remind you, I hope you've all read it, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, but there are those 4 pillars. The improvements in aircraft and engine technology. We're looking at air traffic management and aircraft operations, sustainable aviation fuels, and economic measures. And that's where the EU ETS comes in. So I've got 4 lovely speakers who are going to be able to offer perspectives of industry, policy making, and civil society. Here they are. So take a moment to read so that you are cognizant of who these good people are. And now I can actually ask them to come to the screen. And as I do, ladies and gentlemen, you can ask a question to any of them at any point in the conversation. I won't get to the questions until right at the end. So it's going to be around sort of 3:20, but we'll probably only manage to take 1, 2, maybe 3. So you need to keep them really short. That's important. Say to whom it's addressed and who you are, but telegraphic length, please. And if you put them into the Q&A, I'll get them in the private channel. They will be curated. So can I ask all of the gentlemen, are you with me yet on screen? That would be fabulous to come and join me. Hello to our MEP. Hello there to Dirk Benschop. I'm going to briefly introduce you. Thank you very much for your patience to all of you. Just bear with me a moment. I promise it's not going to be long, so that those who are less knowledgeable about who you are can understand the perspective and where you're coming from in this panel debate. So our MEP Marian Marinescu is the coordinator of the EPP group for Transport Policies and also chairman of the European Parliament's Sky and Space Intergroup 2019 to 2024. And he's also importantly the rapporteur on the Single European Sky recast, which is pending negotiations in the committee. So he's got a lot of experience and a lot to say. So I can't wait to hear your point of view on the roadmap. Pete Harrison, there is the Executive Director for EU Policy at the European Climate Foundation. So the kinds of programs that he is overseeing include for sectors like transport, buildings, energy systems, land use. So it's very important to have somebody who's looking at all those different sectors to see how the ambitions and the vision of this one fit into all of that. And of course, I think very much in the back of his mind and as part of his work is we talk about a fair and a prosperous transition to this new economy. So where does this roadmap, how much is that honouring that kind of transition? So welcome to you, Pete. We also have Dick, sorry, why am I saying Dirk? Do you know, I was on the phone to a Dirk this morning and look what I've just done. I do apologise. Dick Benschop. He joined the Schiphol group in 2018, coming from Royal Dutch Shell. And prior to Shell, he worked in all sorts of different functions in the Dutch Parliament and in the Dutch Labour Party. So it's going to be really nice to have this correlation between the policy making and the industry. And there we have, with the very orange branding behind, our last gentleman, Johan Lundgren, who joined EasyJet in 2017 as CEO. He's got a lot of experience in the travel industry, more than 3 decades, although he's only 23. So goodness knows how you've done that, Johan, do the maths. And has most recently become the Group Deputy Chief Executive Officer of TUI and the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Mainstream Tourism at TUI. So welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to have you with me. I ask you to keep your microphones off until you speak. Don't worry if there's some hiccups. The first very obvious question, and I'll start with our MEP, if I may, is just very, very briefly. For you, tell me about this roadmap. What do you hear there? What makes you feel enthusiastic? Where do you see some pain points? What's your response?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. This report is for us very important support. For us means for the MEPs that are supporting this kind of approach. First, a roadmap and then the targets. I heard that Mr. Canfin was saying that he is supporter of the roadmaps very well. But we started a little bit not in this way because we decided first the targets. For me as an EPP member, it's also very good because in the position paper of EPP, we are asking for roadmaps for all transport modes. So I am very happy to see this from aviation. I am very happy that there are all associations there. Of course, I value all the 4 sectors where we can work on decreasing the emissions. First is the air traffic management. I see Council, one of the 5 associations. I hope that they will support also in the negotiations that are now starting for the CES2 Plus, the same thing that is written here, because up to now, in my discussions with them, it was not the same situation. And in the same time, I ask all associations and the members of association to make known this report to the ministers in such a way that the ministers will send the position in the council regarding ATM in the line of this report. About the second part with the technology, of course, research, I want to see how much will be allocated to Clean Sky, because Clean Sky had a very good results, but in this moment, Commission didn't make public the plan for the new Clean Sky, and I hope that will be an amount that will allow the work in this direction. And in the same time, we need money for the fleet renewal. And I hope that RRF will support this. Unfortunately, member states will decide where to put the money. I proposed in the parliament to have some European added value programs, projects. One of these I proposed to be aeronautics. I didn't succeed to have it in the regulation, but I hope the member states will think that without airlines, connectivity, mobility in Europe, it's very difficult. SAF, I think that we need a higher ratio than that one proposed by the Commission in the strategy, because we need to, I don't know, to provoke the market in the same time the consumption, but also the production. Because up to now it's like, the production is saying is not a high request. Yeah, the request, the consumers are saying there is not enough. So we need some incentives. And about CORSIA, we need CORSIA. We need CORSIA. It's okay with ETS in Europe, but we need to align ETS or to align CORSIA to ETS. But we need CORSIA to be applied everywhere, because otherwise the competitiveness of our industry in this sector will lose a lot. So this is, let's say, for the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those very, very clear top lines. And doubtless your colleagues on the panel will actually have some comments on your first statements there. So I will ask you just to be momentarily patient, because I think we've heard from the institutional side and we've heard from industry. We haven't really heard from, well, there we go, that's a big ask, the voice of civil society. But asking for that perspective, I'd like to ask Pete. I'd like to come to you first for your comments, what you hear, the commitments, the actions. You know, I mean, two sides of the coin, it's always, isn't it? Where do you feel, yeah, that looks like something that makes me feel quite optimistic and there's an opportunity, and this is where, oh, not quite sure, a few pain points. I have a few questions for the others on the panel. So there we go, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much, Katrina. Firstly, it's great to see that European aviation is finally starting to talk more realistically about what needs to be done. So that's very welcome. The roadmap even goes as far as recognizing a degree of demand reduction and even ticket price rises. So that's a change. But it doesn't quite go far enough. I think, you know, going far enough means really recognizing and internalizing that the business as usual is going to look very different in the future. The truth is that there's a whole generation that might be willing to cut their flying significantly. Now, critics of that might say, well, we're going to get straight back to business as usual after the pandemic ends. But look at the fundamentals. Yeah? When you're doing policy for 2030, you need to look at the fundamentals. Last week, we had an epic freeze in Texas. The week before, a glacier collapsed in India, leading to a flash flood that killed over 100 people. Even in Brussels, just last week, we went from -8 degrees to +18. The impacts of climate change have only just started. And I find it impossible to believe that a decade from now, citizens will be sitting back and just accepting the status quo. John Kerry, the US climate envoy, recently likened inaction on climate change to a global suicide pact. Do we really believe that humanity will do that? So the industry needs to start taking demand reduction as a real possibility. It will be damaging to businesses and to airlines, but that is the real business as usual if we don't move fast on zero emissions technologies. Let me be clear, that is my preferred pathway. We need to get moving on zero emissions technologies now. And regulators need to send that signal now before the recovery from the pandemic sets in. So how do you move fast on zero emissions technologies? This roadmap is a good first step, and it names an important element, sustainable aviation fuel. It avoids previous mistakes on biofuels. There's clear messaging on avoiding the food versus fuel competition and avoiding deforestation. There's a strong emphasis on wastes and residues as feedstocks for biofuels and on power to X or electrofuels. And it recognizes that even with residues, there are still sustainability issues that need to be addressed. These are the right statements, but we wait to see whether airlines, fuel producers, and governments will live up to that. The roadmap mentions 6% by 2030 as a target. I'm not going to say that's precisely right, but that seems to me to be in the right ballpark. The important thing here is that small is sustainable. It's the other way around than with many elements of climate action, where we're trying to be as ambitious as possible. But given the sustainability boundaries, we need to start small first and ensure we're getting it right before we expand. The roadmap's also realistic about costs. Sustainable aviation fuels do cost twice what fossil kerosene is today. And the pathways for the long term that are most promising are almost 8 times higher. So that's why it's important to start now, so that we can drive down costs as soon as possible. And that will reduce the eventual impact on businesses and citizens. So the call for a sustainable aviation fuel mandate is good, but it doesn't get us to zero. I'd just like to speak briefly about what more needs to be done to get to net zero. And here's where the roadmap falls down somewhat. Nobody who I talk to who seriously considers climate policy thinks CORSIA will make a difference. And when it comes to ETS, it's not much better. We'd be kidding ourselves to say that a market-based mechanism with prices at 40 euros per tonne will make a difference to the business case for zero emission solutions. Even the easiest step for using waste cooking oil comes in at 200 euros per tonne. And if you're talking about e-fuels, we're talking about 1,000 euros per tonne or more. Analysis published by the Commission recently shows that the price signal felt by air passengers has been less than 15 cents on a single intra-EU sector flight. Let's compare those numbers. Over 1,000 per tonne on the one hand, and less than 15 cents being delivered by EU policy. I won't even take the time to talk about offsets. Suffice to say that every sector needs to target zero emissions within its own sector. So to some extent, when it comes to the ETS, the emperor has no clothes. And the roadmap could have done well to recognize those limitations. Finally, I just want to say we're waiting for many.
And I'll come back to you, I promise. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Just finally, as a final statement, this industry vision is a really helpful first step in its own subtle way, but it also makes clear that regulators have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you know what I particularly appreciate, the gentlemen, and I think they were going to, are Johan and Dick, who I'll invite in a minute, will obviously, and that's the purpose of getting you all together on screen, want to come back on some of those points you made, particularly that you're saying this no business as usual, the real possibility that the decrease in demand is going to stay also for other reasons, not least this environmental consciousness that we see. I loved it because you sort of gave that thing, you know, at work when you say you've got to give a colleague an assessment and you do the sandwich, you do great, great. That's exactly what you did. I will focus on the stuff that you did say at the beginning, that you recognize that it is a positive new step. You did say there at the end, the regulators have a shed load to do, and you have certain things around the ETS that I'd like the gentleman to come back on as well. But thank you for unpacking that so clearly. You can take a moment now while I invite to join me the CEO of EasyJet, Johan Lundgren. So,
well, there you go. Thank you.
Hello. You've got the nice position where you've heard a lot there, so you've probably got quite a bit to say. So maybe chunk it up. But,
well, the problem is always, you know, when you prepare something in advance and then suddenly you want to respond to the things that's been said here, and I'm going to try to put that in the context of combining all these things, if that makes sense. Yeah.
All right. Perfect.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and having me here, and also looking forward to the opportunity of speaking on behalf of airlines for Europe on a topic that is going to probably be the biggest change as we come out of the pandemic. We've seen that when we've done surveys and studies and looking at customers throughout Europe, that what is the thing that you're going to think differently about post-pandemic and after you have taken the health considerations as a given, and that is sustainability. So there's not a doubt that this is going to be, you know, something that is just going to be, you know, increasingly in importance. And I think that aviation with this roadmap is not only showing that it wants to adapt itself also, but I think also the ambition goes higher than that we want to come out this in a leading way with some of these technologies. But let me just reiterate a little bit of a reality check of where we stand today. You know, the truth of the matter is that the sector is fighting literally for its survival. Yes, there's light here at the end of the tunnel with the vaccination programs that we are seeing being rolled out now through Europe. But the consequences of these lockdowns and the restrictions that's been in place and the huge cash burn and losses and the debt that the industry has taken on means that we have lost the maneuverability and the option that was available to the extent it was before the pandemic to invest into things that doesn't really generate the return in the short term. Now, this is somewhat different also from how various companies are addressing this. As EasyJet, as you know, we were the first major airline in the world in 2019 who decided to offset all the carbon emissions from the fuel we're using as a bridge before we get on to new groundbreaking technologies. But I think that it's important now to recognize the absolute need for governments and the Commission also to help and support in direct investment in some of these technologies that we've been talking about, whether that is hydrogen, whether that is electric, or whatever it is that really got to take us into a different place. I think also to help companies and the industry to de-risk the investments that the industry needs to make. You know, look, this is not rocket science. If you're coming through this pandemic with all the problems and all the debt that is there, and you are going to need to do investments, you want to make sure that actually that doesn't turn out to be a failed investment. So what can the Commission and what can governments do to allow the funds that is made available to from the industry into something that will still be as safe and secure and manageable as possible? We would be also looking for a framework from governments and the Commission to finally implement the single European sky. It will have an effect from day one when that takes place. We would also be looking for, and I think it hasn't been mentioned here, on how we can also see that there is renewable energy available for some of these technologies that we are talking about. It's one thing that you might see that whether that is electric or hydrogen, but you know, we're still going to need to have an ample supply of renewable energy coming our way. And I think also, which is important, don't forget, and it hasn't been mentioned yet, that there's a whole thriving industry waiting here to happen within this area. The investments, whether that is in battery as an example, or hydrogen, or DAX, or whatever it is a big, hugely important industry going forward, where I think the European countries can take and play a very big part of this whole thing. So we need to work together. We need to come together on that. Now, I have to disagree with Pete. As huge respect I have for Pete as well. I don't believe for a single moment that we should look at measure that reduces demand. That is sloppy thinking. The issue is not whether we should fly less. The issue, what do we make sure that we can take the contributions and the benefit from aviation, but make sure that the industry has less impact on the environment. Now, the economic measures sometimes that have been talked about, let's address them and call them for what they are. Increased taxation, making it more pricier, as an example. You know what that means? That means that people that are privileged on this call will be able to continue to fly. Wealthy people, just like before the deregulations, gonna fly. Load factors will be worse. Inefficiency will creep into the system, and hardworking families, students alike, are not going to be able to enjoy the same privilege as people who can afford to pay that. There is no evidence whatsoever that taxation has done anything for the environment. Nil. So the question must be, how can we continue with the benefit that aviation gives to economies, to people's lives, and do that in a way where we very, very rapidly can see, and that's what I completely understand and recognize, that it needs to be now more details on that, how that can happen with the new technologies coming available. And just to finally on this, on the SAFs as well. SAFs is something that, you know, needs to be recognized in the scale of what it would take to get you somewhere with the impact that it has. It is an offsetting mechanism that will play its role for long haul, but within the short haul, there are much more promising technologies that I think we need to invest into. And it's better for the environment. It is better for the environment if you invest those money today in qualitative carbon offsets programs, rather than invest into something that's going to generate something in the future, while the need is to do something right now.
Thank you very much. And absolutely, let you have some breathing space there, because you needed to come back on some of those. I think, just to say, I don't know whether we can have all speakers on screen at the same time with their cameras on, then at least we are all together rather than, but that's just a question if everybody wants to put their camera on and we can all be together. But I know that Pete would just like to clarify. Yes, I thought that this issue around the demand was possibly understood, or the point you made and how Johan responded was maybe not quite aligned there. Pete, let me give you just a moment to come back.
Yeah, I won't take long. Yeah, perhaps I should have been clearer. I wasn't saying that, you know, this should be our preferred route. Very much the preferred route, I think, for, you know, society, for business, is the least disruptive route possible, and that's to move to zero emissions technologies as quickly as possible. And, you know, just as, you know, if there was a storm on the horizon, you know, demand reduction is that storm on the horizon, yeah? You would expect your pilot to reroute around that storm, yeah? Not fly straight into it, right? And for aviation, the storm on the horizon is demand reduction. And I very much hope that it can recognize that storm and it can divert around that storm by really working hard with government, with civil society to get this right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your fabulous analogy there as well. I think that was, we like that one. So you've been very patient. Hold your thoughts for a moment. We do have more time to chat, and I think we'll have time for a couple of audience questions towards the end. And I know those are going to be filtered because there are quite a few. So if I might come to you, Dick, you've been very, very patient. I kind of come to you, but you're sort of free to come into this, as I said, to make your comments on the report. But a bit the question I asked for Michiel right at the start, which was to say it does show a great level of collaboration. We've used the word unique. And, you know, as I said, COVID kind of reinforced that. And I asked him, are you optimistic that this kind of commitment and coordination can continue going forwards? And also in the light of some of the issues that Pete raised there, into changing thinking, changing habits, not flying into the storm. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrina, and all the participants. Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think this is an important moment for the European aviation industry because this is a commitment, and a huge commitment to net zero in 2050. In line with the Paris Agreement as well. And it has not been made that clear so far, but it is here now. And it might be challenging, yes, but there's a roadmap as well that shows that it is possible, and it should be possible, and we have to make it possible. It's not completely new. It builds on earlier initiatives. European airports have already made a net zero pledge. But we do this in the context, as highlighted as well, of the COVID crisis, which is the biggest crisis in the aviation industry. I think it has two effects. Agreeing with Johan on the fact that it will accelerate change as well. That's one clear effect it will have. And we're talking about building back better, and no way business as usual. And that is driven by consumers. It's driven by the sector itself and our own responsibility. And yes, it is driven by policy as well. The other side, of course, of the crisis is that we have huge financial losses in the aviation sector. And that means that we have to get it right, the way we are going to do this. The regulatory framework, how does it enable research and development? How does it trigger the right investments? The public-private partnership element, which everybody highlights, including public support for the sustainability drive in aviation. We've tried, I think, with the parties to translate this into a next phase as well, the call for a European Union pact, the industry and the institutions for sustainable aviation. What are the next steps going to be on policy, on regulation, on innovation, on investments? It has to work together like clockwork because the challenge is huge. And yes, we are in the midst of a crisis. But at the same time, I believe that with this development, aviation, which has always been talked about as a kind of a special sector, are we committed or not? Do we have to look at it differently than to other sectors? I don't believe so. We see the same mix of measures, the same approach now for aviation as for other sectors of the economy. We see demand measures, the single European sky, fleet renewal becoming more efficient. We see regulation, a new regulation coming in, the blending mandate for the sustainable aviation fuels, absolutely necessary. There will be pricing incentives like in the EU ETS, not in itself sufficient, but contributing to the mix. Yes, there will be a big role for innovation because we don't only have to get to 2030, but we have to prepare for beyond in terms of aircraft design, in terms of propulsion. And all of that will trigger an enormous lot of private investment, and it will have to be supported by public support as well in order to make this happen. And I'm optimistic as well, and we can talk about that, what's happening in terms of the number of initiatives that you now see happening across the aviation sector in the value chain, but also in the energy sector as far as it concerns fuels. And you see front runners, and my own airport, Schiphol, wants to be a front runner. You see countries that want to be leading. You see all type of new initiatives. We're going beyond the thoughts, beyond the planning, even beyond the pilots. It's the scaling up that starts now, and we have to get the mix of measures right. And I think this commitment is a very important contribution to that. And especially, I see the way how it's being received and how we can build on it.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to stick with you just for a moment because there are two. Let me give you the maths, gentlemen. We're at about 3:10, and I need to bring things to a close around past. And we've got a nice question you could already seen, Pete. I can see that's been coming in from the audience. So let me just ask you a couple of things, and I'm sure you've got some discussions to have amongst yourselves. So the main thing I ask you is we're going to have to do this like an intellectual bingo, okay? It needs to be short, sharp, downloading because there's so much to be said. I just want to stick with you, Dick, for a moment and talk about these pilots that Schiphol Airport announced, the 2 pilots on synthetic kerosene, which, you know, the word collaboration, cooperation together has come up so much. This was a good example of that because you had the national authorities and aviation and the fuel companies. So do you want to just, you know, can we expect more of that?
Yes, absolutely. And you see the big skill investments taking place in sustainable aviation fuels now, mostly on bio or bio-waste routes. Sky Energy, Neste are making huge commitments. And you see the first steps towards synthetic fuel or the power to liquid or the e-fuels taking place. And again, there you see also the real big energy players, Shell, BP, Uniper, starting to get involved. We have 2 of them in the Netherlands, one in Rotterdam and one in Amsterdam, where you really want to get now first some pilots, but then start to scale up as soon as possible. And then you get those layers of sustainable aviation fuel on top of it within sustainability criteria, working towards those blending mandates, while at the same time investing in the R&D, also in terms of e-flight and other ways of propulsion. If you see what Airbus is doing, if you see initiatives by others, there might be surprises there, like we have seen in de-risking solar energy, like we have seen in battery technology and in electric vehicles. That race is now on in aviation as well. And compared to 2 years ago or even a year ago, despite the crisis, there's so many more initiatives and players coming together and starting to make it happen and get this clockwork around the public policy measures, the regulation, the investments and the innovation going. Most of it will be private investment. It will have a cost to consumer as well. That's inevitable. But we need public support at the same time.
And we need to talk about that as well. But I can see that there's a couple of questions come in that I want to look at. But I just, while we're there, I asked you about that pilot. I just want to come and Pete, I will come to you because I know that you want to answer one of the first questions that's been put in to be posed from the audience. But just, Johan, you talked about, you've already sort of covered taxation and you know, your feelings on that it's really rather too simple. We're looking more at technologies and particularly the sort of the hydrogen powered aircrafts, the new technologies. I know this is very much your passion. So let's just focus, because that is one of those pillars on that just for a moment. You know, there is criticism to say, God, you know, that it's just not going to be quick enough. You know, is there too much reliance on that? What do you say in response to that? And what would you want from policymakers to make that happen more swiftly?
Yes. So in terms of the latter part of the question, what we would like to see is clearly, you know, direct investment and research going into that is funding these projects and these industries. Now, so I kind of laid out that because this is about support de-risking investments and do direct investments themselves and incentivizing that, because it is an industry in its own right. Coming back to the first part of the question, the criticism that exists around this is the point. What people are making is that they're assuming a linear development. You know, the EasyJet has been on to this for quite some while, and I feel very passionate about this, you know, myself. And if I would go back to even 2 years, 3 years from now, when I was talking about electric and, you know, the latest development from our partners when it comes to battery technologies, there were still skeptics that said that, look, it's not even theoretical possible to do. Look, the next generation of lithium sulfur batteries with, you know, theoretically 5 times the capacity when it comes to storing density, releasing of energy, and reduction of weight means that by 2030, an 180-seater airline could fly about 2,000 kilometers, which would cover, you know, 80% of the EasyJet's network. Now, there are other challenges involved in this. There's many challenges involved in this, but today nobody can say that whether that is electric or an electric, by the way, could be working with different, you know, energy sources, hydrogen or a combination or a mixture, but even also hydrogen fuel cells or propulsion within there. There's nobody to say that, look, this will not work. That's out of the question. It will work. We're talking about the timing on how to get there, and the timing is very much depending on the resources going into this. And I think it was mentioned earlier here by one of the participants, quite rightly so. Look, the car industry have decisively gone on to say, look, we're all going to electrify. And if you do a little bit of you know, study historically, watch the car industry. It is one of those industries who are usually leading when it comes to just-in-time production, the customization of models that exist there. And do you think that they're going to satisfy themselves with the performance of the battery capacities as they stand today? Of course not. It's going to be huge, you know, research and developments coming into the performance of those batteries that exist today. And I think with the combination of these technologies, it's going to come our way. We just need to make sure that we can support. And the way we work at EasyJet, we've been doing it with Wright Electric for a long period of time. We're partnered with Airbus in the hydrogen project as well, because we know that we don't have the luxury and the options now to think that, well, you know, let's just sit back and see what's going to happen. We need to prepare our business model for this whole thing, but technology is key. Let's get there as soon as we possibly can so people can fly even more, but with less impact on the environment.
Okay, thank you for that. I just want to check that we still have our MEP with us, because he's the only gentleman who doesn't have his camera on, and I wanted to make sure I'm not leaving him out of the conversation, but I don't know. So I'm gonna crack on in just a moment, because there are a few areas that I would like to cover, and I wanted to come back on. Yeah, and Pete, then I will come to you for that first question that we have there that came in from the audience. I did want to ask you, Mr. Marinescu, because you are a huge, your passion is ATM. That's very much a part of your expertise. And again, we've been talking about where this roadmap sits in this current timeline and where the push has been boosted by COVID. And of course, we're not post-COVID yet, but we are moving that way. And so if there is going to be an uptake of air traffic in the summer and beyond, you know, what do we need to be doing? And when we think within the context of ATM, what do we need to be thinking about?
So I don't think that this summer will be the same thing like in the same situation like in 2019, but already we have 2 summers very busy, let's say, and I think that the network manager did what was necessary to be done, and they succeeded, especially in the second one in 2019, they succeeded to solve the issues. So in my opinion, the approach that the network manager took in 2019, it's valid all the time. And this is what is introduced right now by the Commission in the new CES2+, in the recast of CES2+. So I think that they are prepared to face such a situation that unfortunately, as I saw in all the statistics, will not happen this summer. The traffic will increase, but not in such a way that will create problems. And, you know, I think that this roadmap that was presented today and the requirements regarding the emissions and digital should not take in account the crisis, the pandemic. These things should be done anyway. With pandemic, without pandemic, this industry should go on this road for, first of all, for digitalization, because this is the future, and second, for the exactly what is written here, a centric approach. This will solve a lot of issues, but we have there is an issue here because there is opposition from different member states, and this should be solved. That's the reason that I said that what is written here and Council support it should also support everywhere, including in front of the Parliament and in front of the Council.
Thank you very much, and I think that's critical. And as you say, I mean, that's another important point that you make in the mix. As we talk about the EU, we talk about global, we talk about getting this alignment between CORSIA and the ETS. We talk about how I think even the roadmap says that this is a way of putting the European aviation sector very much as a reference point. But at the same time, as you rightly say, there is all of that negotiation with member states. So if you want to ensure all of this, there is that you also have to consider in the mix in certain issues. And I'm going to pick on certain issues now. There's just 3. I think that's all we'll have time for, gentlemen. It's 3:22. So we have this first question. I'm just going to read them out in case you're not all reading the private channel. And so, of course, that the audience knows which ones have been selected. What prevents us from implementing the Renewable Energy Directive as planned? So technology and feedstock neutral, fully respecting the sustainability criteria developed. And do we need alignment with taxonomy, as is there still some disconnect? Okay, so that's a question. We've got 3. We've got 1 on the ETS. We've got 1 also on SAF. So shall we just have a look at that one first? Pete, let me give the floor to you, please.
Excellent. Thanks, Katrina. I love this kind of question where you feel like, you know, here's one I prepared earlier. So we spent the last year working with a group of stakeholders, including EasyJet, including Schiphol, most of Europe's airlines, and most of the NGOs that are involved on sustainability issues. And we reached a consensus statement on exactly this issue. And I'll just read actually from the press release. I just dug it up on our website. It says here, the current Renewable Energy Directive does not ensure that fuels used in Europe meet the sustainability standards desired by civil society, nor of leading airlines. So I think that's quite clear on that question, right? Not many of us believe that the Renewable Energy Directive is fit for that purpose.
Okay.
Yeah, just
last one, yeah.
If I may briefly. interestingly, we commissioned the consultants that did the impact assessment for the Renewable Energy Directive to make a statement on exactly the same issue. And they said, well, there's 15 things that you need to do to ensure sustainability in the Renewable Energy Directive. The Commission only did 2 of them. 2 out of 15 doesn't give us much confidence. Thanks.
Anyone else before?
Yes, I think that we need political will. That's very clear that we have to implement the directive. It will come, the revision of this directive, and I am waiting for it because we need it. But in the same time, we need coordination between our wishes because we are establishing targets. We are basing a lot on electricity, but we do not have a sum of all the requirements, how much energy we need in, I don't know, in 10 years from now on, how much land we need for this, how much offshore we need for this, what does it mean as a matter of the network, because we have to balance the network. We speak about charging points everywhere, but we need to speak also about network, how to bring energy to that charging points. So, in my opinion, Commission should come with a coordinated, coordination of the roadmaps, because otherwise, maybe there will be a lot of electric vehicles, but no possibility to charge it, or there will be electricity, but not too much consumers. So we need this. We need a balance between, for example, in cars, because it was we spoke about it. Yes, in cars we need a roadmap because we need the consumer to know what to buy right now and how long it will be possible to drive that car. So it's the same thing in aviation, okay. But aviation, it's a longer period to build an aircraft, to design and build an aircraft. So we need to take in account this specific issue.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not going to go any further because I'm going to honour what's come in, and there's one more. So again, super short, gentlemen, elevator pitch. We're just going from floor 2 to 4, and that's the length of time you have to answer. Okay, so we've got a question from the European Waste-Based and Advanced Biofuels Association. The Commission's promotion of SAF via an all-inclusive blending mandate will result in diversion of key waste feedstocks used in the road and maritime sectors to aviation. Because SAF production is less efficient, it would lead to lower greenhouse gas emission savings in addition to economic damage. This is a negative outcome. How can it be avoided?
Yes, very short. It's the same thing. Yeah. We want SAF. We need the raw materials, but we need to evaluate how much, if it is existing these raw materials, and what is the impact on other sectors using these raw materials.
Thank you. And yes, and that was exactly what we also, of course, heard from Pascal Canfin at the outset. Dick, for you.
Yes, but you have to get to a kind of hierarchy of use, of course, of various pathways. And if you talk about bio, yes. In the end, of course, the big lifting will be done by synthetic fuels and by new propulsion as well. But there will be a role, especially for meeting 2030 targets for the bio pathways. And if you look at just ordinary road transport, is the advance of electric vehicles with LNG, with other fuels available, there's many more alternatives. And I think Marinescu is exactly making that point. So then you have to make those choices. And I think there's a very clear case to be made. That the bio pathways for aviations are extremely important, and there are not that many alternatives in this time frame.
Anything else there? Can we go?
Can I just say, you can much better for the environment offset by better carbon programs today. You can do it today. It is available for you today. It removes carbon from there, not even just the avoidance of carbon going forward, but it removes it today. So, and I just to say that, go power to liquid, forget about some of the things that exist around the existing biofuels, because it's just not as efficient as some of the other alternatives are.
Thank you. Let's go back to the ETS, if we may. And again, we've talked about this a lot. You mentioned it, Pete, this alignment. You talked about the ETS. You're not a fan. We heard from Clara de la Torre saying the importance when, you know, the next big conversation in 2022. Here we've got a question, EU ETS on aviation. It's always been changing. Even now there's this uncertainty pending the coexistence with Corsia. So how can all these uncertainties and all of the different impacts, depending on the rules that are finally adopted, are really going to impact on industry emission reduction targets in the sector? So we've spoken quite a lot. Anything else that you want to say? We have about a couple of minutes on this, and then I can pose you the last question. Yes, Pete, thank you.
I think it's a really interesting area. I mean, I think you mentioned in the introduction that we're very interested in the just transition and ensuring that, you know, nobody is left by the wayside. And a really important factor in all of this is employment, right? Aviation industry is a really big employer, as are, you know, many of the industries that are included in the ETS. And I've yet to actually come across anyone who can tell me what ETS prices are likely to be in future, and when that leads to the phase out of certain carbon intensive technologies. And since nobody can explain that to me, then it makes clear that nobody can come up with a plan for a just transition. In order to achieve a just transition and look after people's jobs and help industry, you need to have some clear phase out dates and some certainty. And this is the one really tricky thing with a market-based mechanism. It leads to a lot of confusion, and there's a real risk that confusion leads to unfairness.
So I am confident more in the roadmaps like this one, like this report, than in ETS. ETS, the first effect is to increase the prices, so to affect the customers. That's very clear for me. That's and maybe the result in reduction of emissions is not that one that we want. Instead, these kind of measures are really decreasing the emissions. So let's do efforts for these measures, not for ETS.
Any last comment on ETS there? Or indeed, I mean, Johan, you were very passionate about the consumer and about the fairness of those who can actually afford to travel, because this sustainability journey costs the industry. We talked about a fair and just transition. What should the consumer be more aware of? What should the consumer be responsible for? Do you think the consumer, both environmentally speaking, is going to have that trust going forwards?
Well, first of all, I mean, the best you can hope for, and what we would like to see, is that consumers are making informed decisions about their actions. You know, how you know, not only how they live their life and what they prioritize to do. I don't for a moment believe that people will want to travel less at all. If anything, I think that, you know, this lockdown has shown us, when people say that, well, you know, we managed to go about and do things in a pretty good way in these 12 months. Well, certainly it hasn't. You can look at the damages and the economic, you know, impact that has happened. And I think businesses wants to create businesses. We know that people want to create business links. So people will want to travel and people want to fly more. But what you want to do is to make it clear for them about, you know, who are you going to be buying a product and service for? Who is the one, and this is where it's a competitive advantage, also to say that, look, we are taking a stake here in the ground. We believe we are, you know, doing more than anything else. And the company who sets out that ambition and can credibly prove it, you know, I think we talked about the carbon offsetting. I do understand it's an imperfect solution before you're getting on to groundbreaking technologies, but it's one of the things that you can do today, that gives us in a better position. And that's certainly what I hope that the consumers can do, and then continue to allow them to have the opportunity to have this product available for them, so it doesn't just go to rich and privileged people who can afford to pay whatever the cost is.
And I think there what you are underscoring is what I had said at the outset with Michiel, that part of this roadmap is really trying to find that correlation, that relationship between all of the different areas where you are trying to overhaul. Well, some you didn't say overhaul, some you need, I think the roadmap said, a new approach to existing solutions, and some really are, you know, much more of new solutions, and where all of that fits together, and perhaps also the consumer being able to understand trade-offs, because I think that's a much more nuanced conversation that is difficult to have very widely in the public domain. I'm going to give, because I need to close this, but because you've been so beautifully silent, Dick, as a sphinx there, or as a ninja, is there anything that you wanted to just throw in at the last moment before I close? Because we have two final speakers before the event finishes. Dick, anything?
Picking up on the bigger issues of what aviation is and what flying means. If I look at my own children, they are on the one hand hyper conscious as far as environment is concerned, but they are hyper mobile as well. So if we want for them and for future generation to maintain the ability to explore the world while saving the world, we have to solve this. I think we can solve this, but that's why we have to do it. And therefore you keep the benefits of the aviation, get rid of the carbon, and how to do that. But that's a big driver. And Europe, if Europe leads here, if Europe in technological sense de-risks decarbonization of aviation, that's a monumental global contribution that we can make, because the rest of the world, regardless of what happens in Europe, is not going to stop flying. So we have to help them to get rid of this conundrum. And this could be a major area where Europe does not just work towards achieving its own target and therefore contributing to, but help the rest of the world in a momentous way.
Thank you for that. And I think it's been very interesting as far as we could go into the depth we could with all of these different areas in those 4 pillars of where it's challenging, where it's a short term, a medium term, a long term, where the policy making needs to support the investment, what kind of the investment. Of course, we only touched on the monitoring and evaluation aspect. I do quote Pete again, regulators have a shed load to do. And also what I liked, also Pete, you said, and I think that might have got missed somewhere just by me, but you said small is sustainable. Mistakes have been made in the past when it's just too big, it's too bold, it's too pushy. So speed is of the essence, God damn it, because we don't have time, but we need to be a bit agile and really unpack some of those things. And that really did come out for me between Pascal and Jan, when Pascal was saying, we need to know this, and Jan was saying, well, we need to know that. And they're, okay, where is that space and when that we are going to get together? Because we want to be together, but there needs to be a bit more detail in there, particularly on what the investment needs are for the sector that is clearly saying there is a cost for this. And how do you balance it, passing it on to the consumer, who, as Johan said, it can't just be for the privileged elite. So it is time to wrap up now. I need to move on. Can I say thank you to all of you, gentlemen, for downloading just a small part of the contents of your considerable brains. And of course, I'm sure that any speaker who feels frustrated and has a question can get in touch with you if needs be. So thank you very much. You're allowed to relax off screen now as I move on to the penultimate speaker of our event. Thank you to all of you. So who is that penultimate speaker? Well, it is, of course, the European Commissioner for Transport, Adina Vălean, and we are going to hear from her now by video message. So if our lovely technical crew could please play that message. There we go.
Thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts with you today, and thank you also for the most interesting analysis of the way ahead for aviation. The Destination 2050 report is sending a strong signal. Decarbonizing aviation can become a tangible reality, a belief shared both by the industry and the legislators. I really do salute from the start the pathway that you have set out to reaching net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. The report sends a very important signal to decision makers, since decision taken today, or indeed not taken, will hugely influence the situation 20 years from now. Just a few years ago, it would have been impossible to have all the actors sharing the same goals and vision as we are seeing today. I said it before, sustainability is about the present and the future at the same time. It requires a very fine balance between the vision we have for the next decades and the pragmatic reality. What is the reality today for the aviation sector? A scary ride in a time machine that brought us back a few decades. We'll need a few decades to get back to at least 2 years ago? No. Growth will return sooner rather than later. With a twist. It makes no sense to bounce straight from catastrophic economic losses to increased environmental impact. That is why, alongside an increase in flights, we have to see a decrease in emissions. We now have the technologies, we have a plan, and we have the commitment of the entire aviation industry to change. We need transport to keep doing what it does, but to do it better. This is what our sustainable and smart mobility strategy is about. It's a pragmatic approach to growth for the sector, growth that promotes a cleaner, smarter, future-proof, resilient transport network. I like to think of it as the starting gun for us to build back better. The cooperation across the entire aviation sector that led to a broad and joint vision of what is needed for recovery, set out in last year's Aviation Roundtable report, was remarkable. I'd like to make a few observations on the points you highlight in your climate mission. Setting milestone targets for 2030 aligns with the EU approach. In June, we will launch our Fit for 55 package that will support the reduction of total EU greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to their 1990 levels. I welcome your recognition of the need to act in 4 areas: aircraft and engine technology, air traffic management and operations, sustainable aviation fuels, and what you refer to as smart economic measures. I also take note of your point that a level playing field is indispensable for the decarbonization of the aviation sector. And I am, of course, paying particular attention to what you expect from policymakers, among which the European Commission. I think you will find that the policy measures outlined in our sustainable and smart mobility strategy will support your overall objectives. For example, we state in the strategy that we are considering setting up a renewable and low-carbon fuels value chain alliance, which could facilitate the future market for sustainable aviation fuels in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, like all of you, I ache to get on a plane and fly, and I'm confident it won't be long until we will soar again above the clouds. It has been too long. Rest assured I will do everything I can to help restore a competitive, sustainable, innovative, and quality-focused aviation ecosystem that connects Europe, provides jobs, and serves citizens. Europe must remain a leading player in international aviation and a global model for sustainable aviation. By working together, I'm confident that we can make this happen. The Destination 2050 report provides valuable input. It will undoubtedly serve as a very important reference, including within the European Commission. Thank you.
So thank you very much to the Commissioner there. And now I'm just in a moment going to invite our last speaker for some closing remarks, but because I'm going to disappear and give him the floor to close afterwards, let me thank again all of our fine speakers, of course, the 5 associations who organised and hosted the event and who are the orchestrators of the roadmap, the organising team at FTI Consulting, and of course, big thanks to you, our audience, without whom, frankly, there is no event. Do tweet your impressions. Do tweet your words of wisdom, #Destination 2050. And if you enjoyed the discussions, then keep your ears to the ground and your eyes on the Destination 2050 website, because this should be the first in a series where, as you can see, there is so much to talk about on this sustainability journey for the European aviation sector that doubtless more webinars are coming your way. So do keep an eye out for that. So now I have the pleasure of passing the moderating baton on for a second time to this speaker for his closing remarks. Now, he is the CEO of International Aerospace defense and security company, Leonardo, and he's honorary chairman of the Italian Industries Federation for Aerospace, Defense and Security. And his name is Alessandro Profumo. So if he could please join me on screen, how lovely. Thank you very, very much, sir, for your patience, because we ran over a little bit there. There was so much to unpack in the time that we have. So many things. It's to you to close. I've had the privilege of navigating us through this event, and of course you have the honor now of closing it. I thank you very, very much. I wish all of our audience and our speakers and your good self a very, very good rest of the day. So it is now in your hands to make some closing remarks.
Many thanks, Katrina. Esteemed speakers and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to apologize with all of you not having been able to follow the whole event and discussion, but unfortunately, I had to attend a meeting of Leonardo Board of Directors, so I had to spend some time with them as well. It is nevertheless my pleasure to have the opportunity to close such an interesting discussion on our industry's vision and possible contribution to one of the topics that is at the heart of Europe's goals for both the near and the distant future. Civil aviation has been at the same time a driver and a symbol of globalization and of social and economic growth. Before the 2008 economic crisis, flights to, from, and in Europe doubled over 20 years. Well representing our aviation supported the creation and distributed value chains that characterize our global businesses, the development of isolated communities allowed by regional flights, and the growth of tourism into one of the leading aviation markets worldwide. This trend was strongly confirmed after the relative stop in the years immediately following the 2008 crisis, and we believe that the same will also happen following the pandemics, even if with new characteristics and technologies, as we were just discussing. According to this belief, the report foresees that in the next 30 years, flight from EU will grow from 7 to 12 million per year, and passengers will grow from 750 million to 1.4 billion. These numbers mark the measure of a potential success, but also of the challenge we face as an industry in terms of image. In fact, we are too often considered not a driver of growth, but an exploiter of growth, more a polluter than an innovator, more an industrial complex than a service industry enabling social and economic relationships. For me, this is the most relevant aspect. To all effects, aviation has been a driver of the human society development and prosperity, and a key instrument to allow and promote the reciprocal sharing of culture, of knowledge, and of values. All of that by connecting. For this reason, I believe the release of Destination 2050 report is particularly important, since it reasserts the collective belief of our industry that will continue to be an engine of growth and of social development, and that will do so while accepting our responsibilities towards the sustainability of the environment. What we want to stress here today is that we are not only an industrial sector. We are a complex and interconnected and multi-character ecosystem with strong technological competencies and capabilities that we must enhance if we want to achieve sustainability both in terms of environment and market as well. And as my colleagues have stated during this event, we cannot do this on our own, but we can succeed only by working jointly with the European governments and institutions. We are among the world main players in a number of technological and industrial areas, and our commitment to the Green Deal and to sustainability is a bet on our future, born from the firm belief that Europe is leading in the right direction and that sustainability is going to be a key driver of future growth, not only in Europe, but worldwide, where we fly, sell, and support our products. The vision we present today is, in fact, not only an environmental vision, it is also an industrial vision and a market vision. Such a wide behavior cannot be only a side commitment for our industries, but it will become the core of our industrial strategy and vision, our R&D activity, of our industrial and services development, and of our cooperation at European level. We therefore need to step up now our joint activities in this area. As an industry, we are planning to invest 3 billion in the Clean Aviation Partnership, and will also continue to invest individually in decarbonization by developing new aircraft, innovative engine and system, by changing the fuels that propel our craft. By optimizing traffic and traffic management, we strive to be net zero for Europe in 2050. These technologies will become the core of our industrial and service business, and therefore we need appropriate funding to support the required developments, starting with research funds and with incentives for innovating fleets and infrastructure. The Clean Aviation on one side and CESAR on the other side partnership should receive a proper budget aligned with the industry plan investment, and with the ambitious goal that we are sharing, avoiding a reduction of funding rates of research activities and gaining instead in flexibility on timelines and forward payments. This is even more important and as companies are facing strong financial pressure, are forced to reduce or postpone investment, and are working hard to maintain high-skilled engineering jobs. To facilitate investments, the aviation sector should also be included in the EU taxonomy, and initiatives that will surely play a relevant role to allocate public and private funds to sustainable development and climate protection. In the taxonomy regulation adopted in 2020 by the EU, the aviation sector is not included, but since this is still a work in progress, I profit of this opportunity to remind that it is another important goal. The aviation industry is ready to work and collaborate with all environmental stakeholders. In particular, we need to partner with the energy sector to leverage technological and industrial synergies, to support the development and production of new fuels, and to help renewing airports. We need to work with the institutions at central and local level to create new concept of regional and urban landing sites, and to develop platforms for intermodality, including advanced rotorcraft, regional aircraft and solutions to tackle the urban mobility challenges. In addition, we need to work with all policymakers and stakeholders at global level on environmental commitments binding for the whole global industry to guarantee a real level playing field. We must therefore promote this agenda through all multilateral institutions and dialogues in G8 and G20, and in bilateral exchanges between EU and major countries and regional organizations. We will have a very important opportunity with the next United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, that will take place in Glasgow next November. The ambition of this conference is to accelerate action towards the goal of the Paris Agreement, and since aviation has been largely absent from the discussion and conclusions of previous conferences, the themes of this report can be considered as an addition to the topics that will be discussed on that occasion. I will close my remarks by going back to my initial statement and confirm once more that the aviation industry has been and will remain a driver of growth and an enabler of those industrial and personal relationships that are needed to achieve economic and social development. Our industry can play a key role for Europe's recovery, and it will be essential in achieving Europe post-COVID-19 priorities by contributing to recovery of industrial leadership and international competitiveness, and also to the sustainability of our common environment. Thank you for attending this event. As President of ISD, the European Association for Aerospace and Defense Industries, I wish to reaffirm that with over 400,000 workers in the civil aeronautic enterprises across Europe and UK, we look forward to collaborating with the whole sector and with the stakeholders and institutions to promote and pursue the goals we discussed today. Many thanks.